Hello and welcome to Bastionland Broadcasting, where tonight we are looking through not one, but three games by the same creator. These are all games by Spencer Campbell at Gila Games, and we're going to be looking through three games. We've got Drifters, Hunt, and Nova, not in that order. But yeah, three games that are from the same designer who I knew Spencer from sort of like seeing various things on Twitter, but the game that really brought Spencer's work to my attention was the first game we're going to be looking at today, which is a game called Hunt. I'm going to get straight into it because we've got three games to get through, so I want to get on with it ASAP. So Hunt. Now, first of all, the usual transparency thing. I bought these games. I actually bought them at Gen Con. I was lucky enough to bump into Spencer. I, as part of the many times when I sort of saw a stall and I was like, wait, I know this person, and I know their games. So I was lucky to chat to Spencer for just a little while. But I picked up three of these games, and yeah, this is not a paid review. It's just me looking through some stuff that I bought. So, Hunt. I picked this one up at Gen Con, but I had already seen this because I remember seeing this get announced, and it got announced around the time when I was really deep into working on Mythic Bastionland. And this is a game of knights going out on quests, and the biggest compliment I can pay this game is that when I saw this game the first time, I thought, well, shit, someone's made something that is going to be really difficult. It's going to make me feel really inferior about what I'm making with Mythic Bastionland because it's in a similar kind of theme. But the more I dug into it, there's a lot of thematic crossover, but it's a very, very different style of game. So I wanted to look through this one first because this is the first of Spencer's games that I learned about ahead of Gen Con, and then when I got to Gen Con and saw this, I knew I had to pick it up. So Hunt is, first of all these games have like beautiful layout. Like I say, I picked them all up in these very nice little. It's a really nice format because it's thicker than a zine. It doesn't feel as like, it's like between a zine and a book, but they're all the same format. He had so many of these books out on the shelf. I could have, if I wasn't having to fly back to the UK and fit everything into a suitcase, I would have picked up the whole flipping range of them. But he had lots of books in this format, and they're all beautiful books to read through. And as we go through this, it's interesting because, well, we'll get into it, and then and it's interesting because it's always interesting when I find a designer who I find that there's a lot of his design that I really relate to, and there's a lot of the sort of philosophy behind his design that I feel we have in common, which is really nice. But then there's certain bits of the game where I'll think, well, that sounds really cool, but that's not the kind of game that I personally am like looking for. So these are very different types of games, but there's like a common thread that runs through them that I really, really admire and I really like. Ordinal M asks, are they all Lumen? I don't think so. Some of them use the Lumen system. I think this one, I get mixed up with which ones use which system because I only have these three books. So I don't have any of the sort of the core system books, if you like, but they're all self-contained. So some of them are based on other systems that Spencer's written, but they're all self-contained things. So I only know them as what they are. So yes, Hunt uses the Lumen 2.0 system. So Lumen. Hunt is a game of sort of, I guess, kind of doomed knights going out on a quest and hunting down a beast. And something I really like about it is it's kind of designed pretty much for one-shots, I think. I think you could possibly do it in a session or two, but it's primarily designed for a very tight kind of time frame. It's like in some of Spencer's blogs, he talks about how not every game needs to be this thing that can stretch out to a campaign. Some of them can just be a self-contained thing, almost like a board game that you can pull off the shelf, play with a group, put it back on the shelf, and maybe you'll go back to it with a different group or with the same group and play it in a different way. But not everything has to be a big campaign game, which I really respect because I've tackled with this a lot where the style of the games that I normally play at home are not big, long campaign games, with a few exceptions. But I always feel like I've got to try and make games fit into long campaigns. But I admire just saying no. This is a short form game, if you like. So we each have a knight. The first thing you'll notice in the rules is there's no dice in this one. It's a diceless game. Your knight will have three sort of approaches, they're called. Valor, Haste, and Guile. And honestly, I so nearly used some of these names for Mythic Bastion. And I had Guile in there for a little while, but I ended up not using that. And Valor I had instead of Vigor for a little while, but it didn't quite fit for what I was doing. It is interesting seeing some of the crossover. I'm not claiming to have invented the genre of knights, but it is interesting seeing sort of the crossover and what's different and what's the same. So you get points in your approaches, and rather than being like modifiers for dice rolls, they are essentially like a resource that you can kind of spend. So if you use your haste, you kind of spend a point of haste essentially. And we're going to jump through to making your knights. So every knight has an oath, and again, it's like a 3-point oath. There's so many like weird little similarities. This definitely predates Mythic Bastion, and so if anyone's stolen from anyone, I've sort of stolen from here by osmosis, but I hadn't read this until I sort of was already quite deep into Mythic Bastion. But it is funny that they've got a sort of a 3-point oath as well. But it is a little bit different, as we'll see. So, the Oath of Stone. Yeah, you're going to choose an oath. We've had the approaches. You're going to choose your approaches, your oath, and your weapon are going to be the things that sort of define your knight. So the oath is kind of it's not quite your class, because as we'll see, like your weapon is kind of more like your class. They kind of, the oath and the weapon together give you like your style of knight that you're going to be. So the Oath of Stone, and I love the art, obviously, it's fantastic. You gain an ability. If you stand perfectly still for a moment's time, your skin will harden and become invulnerable to the forest's mundane dangers and creatures. And you will gain the following power once you begin your fight against the beast. So the structure of this game is you're going to be doing the lead up, which is kind of like the hunt, leading up to the face off with the beast. And then the climax of the game is you're fighting the actual beast. And the run up is all very kind of narrative and quite loose. And you're going through these kind of challenges and obstacles and try to achieve certain things. But then when you get to the beast, it's like a proper, you put out a grid and it's like a proper tactical fight against this beast. And that's really fun. I like that it's like almost 2 games in one. And I think that fits this kind of tight premise really well, where it is, I keep saying it's almost more like a board game in terms of how you would bring it out to play with people. I like that a lot. So yeah, when you bring out the grid, you can do this thing where you can choose any 2 empty spaces on the grid. And until the start of next round, no one can move into those spaces. So you have a very nice kind of little tactical game at the end. And again, I like that the abilities are just very, I'm bringing out the D word already. It's a very diegetic ability. It's not mechanized. It doesn't say, well, you gain +3 armor or +2 toughness. It's just, no, you are invulnerable to the forest's mundane dangers and creatures when you do this. The Oath of the Sky has a different ability. Again, because I'm trying to get through 3 games, I'm not going to dig into everything on every page, but I'm just going to give us a kind of a quick glance through all of it and pick out some of the bits that I think are cool. The Oath of Wood. You can speak with trees, which again, no, I have someone who can speak with rocks. It's completely different. The Oath of Echoes. Oh, and they can copy the effect of the most recent power used by the beast. That's pretty cool. And then weapons. So your knight has a weapon as well. So let's say that we chose this Oath of Echoes. Obviously, in the image, the knight has a sword, but if we choose to have a spear or a shield or a scroll, I think it is, it will affect how your character acts. So, your weapon, it gives you some questions to answer about your knight, which, like I said, there's certain things in this game that just aren't my style. And the thing that I've realized is I find these kind of questions sometimes, like a game will say like, oh, ask yourself this question about your character and answer this question. Sometimes I find that a bit overwhelming and it can be a bit difficult for me to improvise around it. I find it much more enjoyable to just roll that and get like a random choice. So rather than having me come up with an answer, I like to have a little table, even if it's just a D6 table, that will have like 6 answers to this question. But it's different people, isn't it? So the weapon also has effects, and the weapon carries quests. So your weapon wants certain things to happen, and the more of those you check off, the more you not quite weaken the beast, but if you fail to fulfill those quests, then the beast will be stronger when you get to actually fight the beast. So if we look at the sword, I got it slightly wrong earlier. I said there was a 3-point oath, but it's not. It's actually a 3-point series of quests that your weapon gives you. So the first 2 are always the same, I think, which is test the mettle of one of your fellow knights, strike back against the forest through desecration or destruction, and then you have the final one, which varies based on your weapon. So sever a spirit to the forest's connection with the woods. And the spear has a different one, the shield has a different one. And these are things that you just kind of tick off as you go through the game. So again, it's kind of, I like that it's very loose and it just kind of trusts the players to know when to tick that off. So we've got some like questions about your character, some things that you can always do. And remember, this is a diceless game. So with a sword, you can always kill a mundane creature of the forest. But when you do, there's like a cost to doing so. And every weapon has a way to do that, I think. And they also have these powers, which are like the abilities that you can use in the final sort of tactical fight with the creature, with the beast, sorry. Okay, so it says here, like, you may have 2 knights of the same oath, but no 2 knights can wield the same weapon. So if you're the sword knight, you're going to be the knight with the sword. But you might both be echo oath knights, or was it like stone oath knights? We've got some questions to answer. And then there's a structure for the hunt, which I won't go into too much detail, but essentially it's very much a scene-based thing. So again, very different to what I would normally go for. But it's this kind of working through a series of scenes. You're kind of going through like layers of the forest until you eventually get to the beasts themselves. And this is where you're going to be trying to check off those quests on your weapon. And then finally, depending on how many players you have, you'll be fighting like one of 3 beasts. So here we go. If there's 2 knights, you fight the fierce beast. If there's 3 knights, you fight the lithe beast. And if there's 4 or more knights, you'll fight the gigantic beast. And they all behave slightly differently. And they kind of get bigger as you have more knights. But it's just a small thing, but I like that it's not like, if it's 2 knights, you fight like a lesser beast. And if it's 3 knights, you fight a medium beast. And then 4 plus knights is like the real beast. I like that they're all, it's not just small, medium, large. It kind of makes them all sound like the real beast. And yeah, they all behave slightly differently. And it goes into kind of like a grid-based tactical combat, which is fun. And then you have like an epilogue at the end for whether you succeed or fail. Got character sheets, and that's it. 60 pages. Nice little straightforward game that I think has got a lot of interesting stuff in it. Again, the thing that I really like about these games, and I know I'm repeating myself slightly, but I think it's really important, is each one feels like such a nice self-contained thing. It feels like there's nothing in here that doesn't need to be in here, which I really appreciate. And one of the things that I've seen Spencer write about on his blog is this idea that, I'm trying to make sure I don't paraphrase this incorrectly, but essentially I get the impression that he very much wants to make the game that he wants to make, and he's not trying to make it for a particular audience or in any particular way. It feels very much like a vision of a creator. And I know all games are kind of like that, but I feel like specifically games that have this very focused, laser focus, and they're written by one person, and it feels like he's not compromised on it. It feels like he's had a vision and he's gone for it. And I really appreciate that kind of design. I'd much rather that than sort of, like I say, even though there's bits in here that aren't how I would do it, and there aren't what I would necessarily look for in a game, it feels entirely like a game that sort of exploded out of the mind of one person. And it feels like it was exactly what it was meant to be. Ordinal M says, yeah, Trophy Dark has a similar kind of thing where you're kind of working through circles. I've not read it. I've heard things about it. I've heard good things, and I've heard people that have struggled with it. But yeah, this feels like a very tight version of that. So that is Hunt. So if we're going through time, we're going from like a sort of medieval period. I think next we'll go to Drifters, which is a Wild West based game. Well, it's Weird West, really, I guess. It's not set in a sort of historical Wild West. And this is the problem. When I went to the stall at Gen Con, there were like, in my memory, there were like 20 different books. I don't know how many there were. There might have been more, but there may have been less. But it felt like it was this absolute smorgasbord of like really beautiful RPG books, each one kind of a self-contained game in the most part. And this one jumped out at me when I saw that your characters are sort of well, let's get through it. Let's get to it. There's an interesting relationship you have between your characters and your weapons. Okay, so Drifters. This one does have dice. This is the, out of the three of them, this is the one that has dice. Well, actually, to be fair, the final game does use dice, but it doesn't use them in the traditional way. Drifters does use dice, so this is a little bit more of a traditional game in that sense. But again, it's just very focused. There is a structure to this game, which is you are, drifters in a kind of weird Wild West, and you're investigating these like rifts that have opened up, that kind of like portals to like hell or another dimension, and you're sort of sending out patrols to deal with them. And again, I feel like there's actually a little guide at the back for running a campaign, and the first thing I think it says is something like, well, here's how you can run it as a one-shot. And then it talks about running it as a slightly longer form game. So I really like that it feels like something you could run as just a self-contained game again. So the thing that's really interesting about this game, let's get to character creation, because there is a skill system. It's very straightforward. You're going to roll a die, try and get 4 or more. You'll have different dice in different skills. So you might have a D6 in Brawl, but a D8 in Compel. So it makes you more likely to succeed. You also have a background. Let me get to it. Well, I'm jumping ahead. You have your abilities, and you'll have a background, which I'll get to. But one of the key things here is, if you die, you just come back. You reach 0 health, you're dead, but you get resurrected by your gun, because the guns in this setting are kind of magical things, kind of similar to how the swords were in Hunt. It's kind of a theme, I guess, between the two, that your weapons are kind of sentient. But here they can bring you back from the dead, and each time you come back from the dead, you get a corruption. But the corruptions are all like good things for the most part. Like, they're good things in combat, but out of combat, they're bad. So the more times you die, the better you get at shooting and fighting, but you get slightly worse at everything else. And then the third time you die, I think, it's like 3 strikes and you're out. That's it. And that's a cool little like arc for your character. So yeah, we have some backgrounds. If you're a bandit or a con or a hunter or a marshal, gives you some very basic stats that you need, and also you choose an ability from here. It's a little bit, some of the abilities remind me a bit of, I guess, like Blades in the Dark or like a Powered by the Apocalypse kind of feel. And in the same way as those games, Some of them are a bit more mechanical, but most of them here are very impactful. Like with Blades in the Dark, I always, when I'm looking down that list of like special abilities that you choose, there's certain ones that are something like, oh well, when you fight, I'm being very unkind here, but some of them read very much like, oh, when you fight you get +1 armor, or when you do this you get +1 to this. And then there'll be certain ones that are like, you can eat anything and you gain its memories when you eat it. And I'm like, well, I'm picking that one because those are the ones that I really like, the ones that just make, the ones that break the rules, rather than just kind of interacting with the rules. And a lot of them here are like that. So yeah, the lasso, anyone you lay hands on cannot escape your grip until you release them. That's it. It's not like +3 to grappling. It's just like once you grab someone, you've got them. and there's a lot of ones like that, which I really like. Now here's the cool thing. So when you choose your weapon, each weapon is kind of like a little mini game. So it's not just that they behave differently and they have different abilities. They kind of use like almost an entirely different combat system. So you're still rolling to try and like hit on a 4+ generally. But it works in different ways. So the revolver, you actually stack 6 little dice in the 6 chambers of your revolver. And when you shoot, you can take as many as you like and roll them. But you have to then, obviously, it takes longer to reload. So you can reload as an action and put 2 back into the chambers. And when you advance your gun, which is like leveling up, you can inscribe these runes into the chambers instead of having bullets in there. And they're just bonkers. They're things like, yeah, no one can get close to you unless you allow it. And you just cannot die your final death, so you just keep on going. And you deal damage on a hit equal to your number of corruptions. So the more times you die, you just keep on coming back and you keep on getting more powerful. But I guess all the other players are going to die, so you're left on your own. The rifle has this kind of thing where you're building up, what's the word? It's called like aim or something. Hone, that's it. You have a little tracker for a number called hone, and that you're kind of adding that to your attack roll, and when you get a 10 on the d10 roll to attack with the rifle, you get a crit, which means you get to choose from this list of fancy effects that you can learn, or just extra damage, or like you can have it do things like ricochet, so it bounces off and hits the nearest enemy, or you can do things like suppressing fire. So yeah, the rifle is more about like building up to the perfect shot and kind of getting more accurate as the fight goes on. The shotgun is really cool. It obviously has 2 shells, so you roll 2 dice to attack, but you don't need to roll to hit, it just always hits. But when it hits, you sort of, well, you can set it between 2 different modes. You can have your shotgun set to damage mode or control mode, and you can switch between them as an action. And then when you roll the dice, you're always rolling 2 dice for the attack. You assign them to like different axes. So you can say, let's say I rolled a 1 and a 6. I could say, well, I'm going to put the 1 into AoE and the 6 here to cause 2 damage. Or I could put the 1 here to just cause 3 damage and the 6 into blast. Or I think, I don't know if you can you put it all in, so I could just do 5 damage, could I? I'm not sure, I hope so. And yeah, and if you do it in the control section, then if you got it in control mode, then you assign them in this section instead. So yeah, it's just, the shotgun feels like a very cool kind of like a gun that has lots of different effects, which is cool. And yeah, they're your 3 guns. And then you've got a setup for sort of running the campaign. So you've got these rifts, and there's this loop of like, come to a town, do a patrol, confront the presence, which is like the evil presence in the town, and then you wander the wastes. And each of those is kind of a different section of the game. So patrols are like going out on patrols, and you're kind of checking off sections of these clocks to kind of deal with the problems. And then you've got the final sort of confrontation with the presence, and an option here to have a finale. And again, I like that there's a structure, very much a structure in place. It doesn't just throw you out and say, yeah, go and have some Wild West adventures with these weird characters. it has quite a rigid structure, which is something I appreciate more and more as I sort of play more different games, because again, I keep going back to Mythic Bastionland because it's all that I'm thinking about right now. But in Mythic Bastionland, it's a very clear structure. Like, the game, once you know what you're doing, the game almost runs itself. You kind of don't need to prepare a lot of stuff, and you probably won't end up with a situation where you're just like, nothing's happening. And this is the same. It's got like a nice clear structure for actually running the game. And that's it. We've got some guidance for setting up your own rifts. We've got some enemies here to fight, which are all cool and kind of evocative. We've got a GM's guide, which is always appreciated. So again, it talks about how it's not a historical setting. It's like a weird. It kind of is what you want it to be, but it's kind of like a weird west, I guess, is probably the phrase to use. And then a little sample adventure, character sheets, and that's it. That's Drifters. So again, very nice, slim format. Very glad I picked this up. And then the final one we're going to look at is, so this is the one that as soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted this one. So I said Hunt was the one that I came over and I picked up, but I'd already looked at Hunt a little bit ahead of time because I was so scared of it. But I've all that, and I thought I'm going to pick up a couple of other ones, and there were lots of ones that look cool. There's well, I won't give you a sales pitch for them now, but there were lots of games on that section look cool. Rune is the one that I hear lots of people talking about. But the one that I saw that I just immediately thought I'll definitely be grabbing that one after flicking through it is Nova, because as you know, if you've been following along with my talking about getting into BattleTech, about a year ago I got into BattleTech, and it's been kind of stuck in my brain since then. And I've been working on Mech Attack, so I'm kind of in a very mech-based phase over the last year. And this is very much not BattleTech, as you'll see. It's a very different tone to the kind of... I say this with affection, the very kind of... I'm not going to say the word I was going to say, but BattleTech can be quite stodgy, let's say. This is much, much fresher, let's say. And I say that with a lot of affection for BattleTech. Okay, so this is Nova, and in Nova you are mech pilots. So your mechs are called Sparks, which are like exosuit mech things. And your pilots, you do like write down a little bit about your pilot, but it's basically just like the game is set inside the Sparks. So I don't think you're really going to be doing much of the stuff outside of the mech. We've got a dice system. So again, there is a dice system, but there's a lot of stuff that just happens without needing to roll. I think a lot of the attacks happen without rolls. And when I think of mech combat without dice rolls, it immediately puts me in the mind of Into the Breach, which is a good place to be. So we have 3 attributes. As you'll know, a big fan. And then your Spark, which is your mech, has your attributes and health, fuel, and then there's stuff that they can do. And it's interesting. I really like fuel as a kind of thing. It's a slightly different take on like heat. I think a lot of mech, again, I don't know if this comes from BattleTech originally, but a lot of mech systems use like a heat system where if you do something excessive, your heat will go up, and then you need to like cool that heat somehow. And this is kind of the opposite, where you start with fuel and you can spend fuel to do extra things. But the thing that's really cool about this, that I really like, is, I'm just going to jump ahead. At the end of, after all the players have acted, the GM acts and does their things with the NPCs. But then they also generate drops. So any NPCs that died, you roll for each one that died, and they will either drop health or fuel or nothing. And the players decide to allocate that. So you can say, okay, well, they've dropped two fuel and 1 health. Well, you take the health, I'll take 1 fuel, and you take 1 fuel. And it's just really cool. It puts you in a mindset for like you're imagining it being a bit more video game logic-y, which I like. So the thing that I wanted to get into here is what the cool thing about mech games is always looking at different mechs and what they've done with them. And here you have, I like that it's phrased as programming your mech. I keep calling them mechs. Programming your spark, sorry. So you assign attributes to your spark. You assign your health and fuel values, which is really cool. So you can think, well, do I want to have lots of fuel so I can do lots of cool stuff, but I don't want to leave myself being too fragile? Do I take lots of health and then try to not use much fuel? Because not everything uses fuel. And yeah, it feels like a really nice little choice early on. And yeah, the mechs themselves, the sparks themselves are really cool. We've got the Pyre, which is like this fire-based melee spark. So as well as choosing your sort of scores, you're also going to pick from the flares. I think you get 2 flares. Yeah, any 2 flare mods, and I think you can get more later on. So you got like persistent mods, which are things that affect everything. So like if you get +1 health, that's always active. And then you have power mods, which are things that you attach to a particular power that you can do. So you can take this +1 harm and put it on. You can say, well, I'm going to put that on my. I think you can do it on passives. You can put that on my slash. So that means at the start of every turn, I'm going to deal 1 harm to a close enemy for free. And the thing that I like, do you remember what I said about how I don't like to choose the things that are just like +1 this? I'd always rather choose the weird thing. It's nice because you've got all these ones that are like straightforward +1s. And then the second column tends to be the slightly more unusual ones. And that's cool. So yeah, your mech gets a passive ability, some active powers to choose from, and a supernova, which is when they get reduced to 0 health, you do your supernova and then you go dormant. And when you go dormant, you're not necessarily out of the fight. Like an ally can come and bring you back. I think it's at like half health. So again, it makes it a cool choice where like sometimes it might be worth just going and getting killed so that you can do your supernova ability if you're confident that your ally can come and bring you back. So yeah, we've got the Pyre, the Scorch, the Voyager, the Warden, and the Pox, and the Grim, and the Drifter, and the Sanguine. There's more than I remembered, and the Infernal. I'm not going to go through all of them, but yeah, there's a good number of sparks to choose from. And yeah, that's kind of everything on the player side of things. There's lots of mech games like this, like things like Lancer, that have very in-depth systems. And speaking of BattleTech, there's the Mech Warrior, what's it called? Mech Warrior Destiny. I was reading through that book. And this is one that feels a bit... This is one that gets me a bit more excited about running it than those. I think there's lots to like in those games. And, you know, some of them are more complex than others. There are more stripped down, streamlined mech-based games. But this one just feels very, like, very... I say light. It's not super light in terms of rules. There's a bit of crunch going on. But I mean light just in terms of it feels like it would be a breeze to jump into this and play it. So you are going to be basically doing like missions. And there's a little bit of a system for randomly generating missions, which I always enjoy. There's like a few different classes of mission. You're going into like different zones. And some zones are more dangerous than others. So yeah, if you go out into the Umbral, that's like the worst bit. So there's more health points of enemies out there. And yeah, you roll like a general mission type and an enemy faction. So let's say we rolled an assault mission and our enemy were going to be the Hellions. You would then roll this, who are you attacking? And you can even choose like a variant. So it could be that we're trying to halt further movement of, yeah, we said the Hellions already. And based on your zone of your mission, you'll get like a little bit of a spark table almost for like how to, for what the area actually is that you're going into. And some more random tables to generate like the locations and stuff. See, my first thought with this, I a few weeks ago I did a read through of Fist, the freelance infantry strike team, is it called? The paranormal mercenaries game, and I feel like this and that, and I've been reading some of the Nordic Weasel games that have kind of these little mission generators. I'm for something that is really scratching an itch in my brain about these mission generators and sort of a more mission based structure for an RPG. I really enjoy that thing. And then our enemies, which have special abilities, but they're generally much simpler than the sparks that you're piloting. And again, they're very like narrative, very loose actions that they can perform. Things like create a wall of fire. I mean, it's not really described. You just kind of have to work out what the consequences of that are, which is nice. And yeah, so, some people won't like that, but for me, that's what I kind of want from an enemy. Really, I just need to know like, well, what do they do, and I'll work it out. And we've got a few different like enemy factions. Oh, and a corrupted spark. So like an evil version of one of your guys. We've got an example mission. And then we've got the GM section. Principles. Yep. All good. You're also a player in the game. True. You're not solely responsible for fun happening at the table, and you should be having fun too. Good advice. Be a fan of the players. Yeah. This is one of those ones that I know it's like a, I think in Apocalypse World it was phrased as like, be a fan of the characters, which I always thought, because I like a bit of an impartial referee feel, where I don't feel like the referee is necessarily on the side of the characters. I think be a fan of the players is a better way of phrasing it, where it's like, I want all the players to have a good time, even if their characters aren't having a good time. I don't want the characters to have a bad time. I like that kind of neutral stance of a referee, but be a fan of the players is a good way of phrasing it. Keep it quick. I've said many a time that I like fast combat. Spread responsibility. Yeah, players should know their character things. I think that's a fair thing to ask in a game like this. It's a movie, not a simulation. Yeah, sounds right. Find the story. Without context, the sparks are just doing one mission after another. Ask them why they do it or what they care about, and then explore the answers to those questions. So yeah, that's it. It's like you could just be running this as like a flat one mission after another, but yeah, find the story. That's a good way of phrasing it. And the world is strange. Indeed. So then we've got a bit like of setting stuff. A quick reference sheet. That's very nice to have. And that is Nova, which again comes in a very nice little, not quite a zine, not quite a, well, I say not quite a book. It's clearly a book, but it's a nice, easy, there should be a word for this. I know softback is the word, but like a really slim, sturdy softback that feels like you could just like have it in your bag ready to go at any time. So that's it. We've done 3 games. We've done it in record time. That is Hunt and Drifters and Nova. They're all by Spencer Campbell, and they are all available in various places. If you go to Gila RPGs, there's a link in the description to this video. But if you search for Gila RPGs, they are all available there. If you get a chance to pick them up in print, they are very, very nice books to have. It's probably, like I said, it's probably a good thing that I was limited in how many I could carry back from Gen Con. And yeah, if they sound interesting to you at all, go and check out the rest, because there's like 20 odd games in the series. So that's kind of it for this week. But if you are interested in a game about knights going on quests, is there anything else? Is there another game out there, like, or coming out soon, that is about knights? On cold Miston hills beast Whitsom and fell. In holdings and havens the vassals adwell. Seers know the all, the start and the end. Myths hushed aloud to which truth must upend. Aside vagabonds on snakeline trails, nights render these stories are wrenched from their veils. For the oath, for the glory, through sorrow and ache, the city, that quest to which no night can make. Bastion will always be the only city that matters.